Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And we'll be talking about what's important on December 10, 2018. What's important? And my guest this evening is Dan Meek. And you know who I am, of course.
Dr. Don.
How you doing?
All right.
Are you nervous?
No.
How come you never say you're nervous? You're about 15 times you've been on this show through the years, and you're never nervous.
Well, why? Well, because I'm comfortable with the millions of viewers that you have, and you know.
Oh my God, is it going to be that way? Kumbaya. Yeah, so it's good to have you on again because the stuff you talk about is so critically important for ordinary citizens, I think, and for having the system work, this American system of justice work in a way where it's beneficial to all of us across the board, and not just for the super rich and the people who have a lot of money like you.
Like me? Jeez.
So, I think we said what's important probably nowadays, as much as anything, is the political process, restoring government by the people instead of by the ruling elite.
True. That's what I spent a lot of time working on.
A lot of time working where?
In Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
Oregon has a uniquely bad system of political campaign finance. There was a large study done by the Center for Public Integrity, which is a national organization in conjunction with Public Radio International and other international groups, 3 years ago. And they concluded that Oregon's system of controlling political financing for the purpose of avoiding or preventing corruption was actually the second worst in the United States. The only state with a worse system was Mississippi.
Well, we better hold off on that for the second half of the interview because we want the people to know a little about you personally.
Oh, okay.
Like that. You ready for that? Okay, and you've answered these questions before because
many years ago.
And we'll see if you're lying when people play your most recent interview.
I'll have all new answers.
Okay, if I ask your best friend, who is Dan Meek? If I ask your best friend, who is Dan Meek, what would you say? Dan Meek is, be your best friend. Dan Meek is, pretend you're your best friend. Dan Meek is what?
Is a self-absorbed egomaniac activist.
Let's quit. Egomaniac activist. You're a real activist, and I really admire you for that. You're really dedicated to doing what you're doing. It's so important. And you're so far left until you make me feel like righty.
Well, you are righty on some things.
Yeah. When and where were you born?
Pocatello, Idaho, 1953.
Idaho, okay. Why were you born?
Accident? I don't know. Because my parents wanted a boy and already had 2 girls.
So you're sure you turned out right?
No? Not sure.
Right. Anything significant about your racial or national or cultural heritage that's worth reporting?
I don't know. I'm sort of probably nearly 100% Welsh. My ancestors, pretty much all of them came to the United States in the 1840s from Wales and from northwest England. They got on ships in Liverpool and that were provided by the Mormon Church and sailed to America, took the train as far west as they could to Illinois, and then walked to Utah.
Are you still a Mormon?
No, never have been.
Well, how can you have been from Idaho and not be a Mormon?
Well, Southeast Idaho is very predominantly Mormon, but my mother's family in particular was Mormon, but my father's was not, and when I was growing up, we were not Mormons. My sister later became a Mormon, but we were Presbyterians because that was the only church that we could get a ride to on Sundays.
Did you smoke or drink when you were growing up?
No.
You're a closet Mormon, I know.
No, I was more Mormon than the Mormons, that's right.
So what are you now religion-wise? Do you have a particular religion that you follow?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm. And your education, besides being a lawyer, what else did you do?
Well, that's about it. Went to college in a very good college, University of Wyoming in Laramie, and I went there for 3 years. That was enough to get me into Stanford Law School.
Stanford?
Because Stanford had a hick quota that they had to take somebody from Wyoming every few years. Somebody had to get in from Wyoming, so that was me. Mm-hmm. So I went to Stanford Law School. I ran out of money several times as I was there, and took hiatuses, I don't know whatever the plural of that is, to work full time and then go back to Stanford Law School before I graduated.
You got back and forth, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Son of a gun. You have any college tuition expenses now?
No. Mm-mm. I had several jobs when I was in law school. I was the debate coach at Stanford for the university. I did other things, so that went a long way to paying my tuition.
Mm-hmm. And what other education did you have besides sparring and jousting with legislators?
No other formal education.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what are you doing now to pay the bills?
Using money that I've saved.
See,
my law practice full-time since 1987 has been a public interest law practice, and many years I make no income at all.
Wow, you must have saved pretty good, huh?
Well, I was able to save some money when I made some money from suing utilities for cheating ratepayers in class action lawsuits, starting in the 1980s and continuing until the last one that came through was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But it's been using the savings ever since then.
Wow, you've done pretty well, huh?
Well, 10, 20 years ago, yes. The last 10 years, no.
Do you like Ralph Nader?
Do I like him?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, okay. You have a partner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever?
Linda Williams, partner for 35 years.
She's going to get you for that.
I don't want to go back too far.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't, but Linda has 2 kids. Uh-huh. One has lived in Japan full-time, has produced 3 grandchildren for her, Chris, and one lives here in the Portland area. Mm-hmm. She's had a very interesting life. She graduated from Wharton, went to work for Price Waterhouse in Moscow, Russia, in the 1990s.
Wow.
And was advising during the time that the Soviet Union had broken up in about 1992, and she was there for the sort of the looting of the assets of the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Where they took the government assets, the state property, and basically gave it away to oligarchs and created billionaires and the like.
Is that still going on in Russia now?
I don't know, but it certainly was then, and it was a very wild place. Linda and I visited there in 1996, and everywhere you go, there were people armed with machine guns. If you went into a bank, there was bulletproof glass all over the place and men with machine guns. If you went into a nightclub, there were men with machine guns stationed all over the place.
In Russia at that time?
In Russia at the time.
Oh, wow.
And Ruth Ann's clients started getting shot That is, they would just be shot on the street.
Wow.
So, so she came back. She then moved to London, England, and worked there, and eventually came back. But that was quite the experience.
So this is when monopoly capitalism replaced communism.
Mm-hmm.
Monopoly
Or
capitalism.
when criminal capitalism replaced communism.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any pets?
I have a cat.
What's his name?
One cat. Her name is Toot Sweet because she meows a lot and runs fast.
Okay, I will leave that. Any memberships in political, social, or civic organizations that come to mind that viewers may be interested in knowing about you?
I'm a member of the Independent Party of Oregon. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Independent Party, which began in Oregon in 2007. I'm the legal representative of the Progressive Party of Oregon, which
I'm a member.
Which began as the Peace Party in 2008 and became the Progressive Party in, I think, 2009 or 10. Those are my main membership.
Political
entities.
stuff for the most part, huh?
Oh, yes, yes.
When are you going to become a Trumpite?
Oh, I'm a Trumpite now. Love him.
You can't even keep a straight face with that one.
I think he's actually a secret agent bent on destroying the Republican Party.
Not just the Republican Party. At the rate he's going, he's got about 2 more steps before he achieves full Sieg Heil capitalism. I mean, fascism, rather.
Right. I don't know if he's just playing a role or if he is authentically what he seems to be.
Yeah, is he, what's that state? The administrative state is going on now in Washington, and then we have that underground state that's at work in the background.
Oh, you mean the deep state?
Deep state, thank you. What do you think of the deep state?
Well, if you mean by sort of a government apparatus to control people, keep tabs on them, and make sure that nobody gets out of line, I think it's there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a CIA, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, etc., which were to some extent revealed by the Frank Church hearings back, Senator from Idaho, Frank Church hearings back in the 1970s. But yeah, sure, it's there.
So do you think that Trump and his administration are part of the deep state?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
Sure.
I'm going to leave that one because you do this all the time. Interesting, yeah. Okay. Persons from the past or alive today that you look up to or admired. Anybody comes to mind? Political or human beings or whatever?
Sure. Many of the civil rights leaders, but of course many of them are not alive anymore, like Bayard Rustin, and I think Diane Nash might still be alive.
Mm-hmm.
And of course John Lewis. I met John Lewis in 1987.
Mm-hmm.
I was leaving a job as the staff director of a congressional subcommittee back in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And he had just been elected for the first time to Congress. And so he was moving into the office next door to mine.
Mm-hmm.
And when a new congressperson moves into an office, they have to scrounge for furniture. No kidding. They have to go out and, just find furniture in the hallways and in storage rooms and steal it. And so I gave him my furniture. Moved all of my furniture and bookshelves and desks and stuff into his office in January of 1987.
Walking Against the Wind. Did you read that?
No.
It's a great life history.
Ah.
Walking Against the Wind. Yeah. Who else?
Well, Ralph Nader, of course.
Mm-hmm. How about worldwide? Gandhi, Mandela, any of those characters?
I don't know. I certainly admire them, but I don't know that much about them. But I would say that Ralph Nader is a worldwide character.
And he's been going on forever and ever, huh?
Well, he first came to prominence in about 1964.
Uh-huh.
So that's only 54 years ago.
You're pretty good at math, too, aren't you?
Well, addition anyway.
Yeah. Any others?
No, nobody else in the entire world.
Couple more questions. In the whole wide world.
No. Jimmy Carter was pretty good, I'd say.
Uh-huh.
I noticed that several commentators during the George H.W. Bush, funeral festivities keep saying that, George H.W. Bush, the last of the great generation of presidents. And what about Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
He was in the military in World War II. He was at the Naval Academy. He wasn't out on a ship, but he was in the military in World War II.
Yeah, and they saying goodbye to H.W. And for days on end, all they were saying was just beautiful, powerful stuff about him. And Amy Goodman was the only person in Democracy Now!
Mm-hmm.
Who had extensive reporting of the reality of what
Right.
H.W. was about.
Yes.
Iran-Contra and the whole enchilada.
And other misadventures in Central America and South America. And of course the Willie Horton ad, the vicious, racist campaign that he ran against Michael Dukakis in 1988.
Uh-huh.
Yep, the conventional media doesn't mention that.
When are you going to run for the presidency?
Never. I'm too old already.
Well, why don't you go in and be one of Trump's apparatchiks in his government? He needs some replacements.
Yeah, I could do that. I'm available for that.
Yeah, so, okay. Do you listen to or view alternative media?
Well, you mentioned Amy Goodman. I watch that show sometimes.
Mm-hmm. MSNBC?
Sometimes, not a lot. I generally, I guess I get my news from Google Alerts. I've got 40 or 50 Google Alerts set up for various topics. And so news comes to me in that way from a large number of different sources.
And fairly objective. You can get through the networks and those big corporations with CNN. They do some screening, I think.
Yeah, and what I read is mostly from newspapers and written publications.
Mm-hmm. What's
I read the New Yorker. That's funny.
yeah. What's right with America nowadays?
Wow, that's hard to say.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you what's wrong with America.
A lot. What's right is maybe most people still care about what's wrong. But but there isn't a lot right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. What thought or memory makes you smile on occasion, just out of the blue or something?
Watching the Dr. Don show.
I'm leaving.
I don't know.
You gotta get a new host here.
I don't know what makes riding a recumbent bicycle, that makes me smile, I guess.
Do you do that now?
Yeah, I've ridden across several countries like Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, China,
Really?
India. So that's my entertainment.
Wow. And you still do that?
Not in the last 10 years.
Uh-huh.
I've gotten too busy working on campaign finance reform in Oregon. I'm not kidding.
We need to clone more of you.
Or I need to take a vacation.
All right, so let's take a break here, and then we'll go into the main part of the show, okay? Okay, we're back. Thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like Dan Meek here about who he is and whatever it is we've decided to talk about tonight. We'll be talking again about what's important on December 10, 2018, restoring government by the people instead of by the corporatists, the super rich. You got a name for them?
The super rich, I'd call them the big money boys.
Big money boys. You've got a lot of money, haven't you?
No.
Well, you're traveling in Asia and riding bicycles.
Well,
all
10
over the
years
world.
ago. And it doesn't cost much to ride a bicycle through Vietnam.
Yeah. I bet you've got some marvelous stories about that.
Yeah. But, back in 1995, being arrested by the Vietnamese government for being in the wrong place.
Arrested?
Well, this was back before there were any American tourists there, except a few officially sanctioned trips. So.
And then what happened when they arrested you?
Just held us, a couple of other people with me for a while, and then we happened to have a business card of the Minister of Tourism. And so I flipped out the business card of the Minister of Tourism, and they, okay, you can go.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Now we're going to talking about restoring government by the people, and we had a few questions that we were going to pose to see what we're getting at when you're saying that government by the people. What is Oregon's system of campaign finance regulation? It seems like campaign finance is a critical thing in having our system work, not just in the state of Oregon, but nationwide. Mm-hmm. So campaign finance is pretty important, right?
It is, because if government officials and people who are running for office have to be afraid that any person or any corporation can suddenly contribute $3.425 million to their political opponent, like Phil Knight did in contributing to the Newt Buehler campaign in this past election for governor in Oregon, then government becomes responsive to the wealthy and to the corporations that provide the money.
Hasn't it always been that way?
No, it hasn't. In Oregon, for example, the amount of money that politicians take in and spend on their campaigns has increased generally at all levels, state and local, about a factor of 10 over the past 20 years. That it's 10 times more. And in some cases, like in elections for governor, it's increased by a factor of 20 over the last 20 years.
Why is that?
Because Oregon doesn't have limits on campaign contributions. It's one of only 5 states without limits on a state level.
Of only 5, huh?
Right, and the others are, it's easy to remember them because just think of Villanova University, okay? NOVA, Nebraska, Oregon, Virginia, Alabama, and U for university. There you go. Nova U are the 5 states with no campaign contribution limits. But now, Portland does have campaign contribution limits. The voters in Portland just a month ago.
Just in Portland, but not Oregon.
Just in Portland and also in Multnomah County. Because they also enacted limits in 2016. But
and Portland is in Multnomah County.
Right. In 2018, the voters in Portland, by an 87% yes vote, enacted an amendment to the Portland City Charter that prohibits all contributions in races for Portland City office, that's mayor, city council, or city auditor, prohibits all contributions by corporations and other entities. It limits individual contributions to $500, and it requires that every political ad identify the 5 largest true original sources of funds for the campaign.
Well, isn't Portland a left-wing city?
Yes, it is.
And the rest of Oregon is right-wing?
Well, not the entire rest. A very similar measure was a Multnomah County Charter amendment that passed by 89% of the vote in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have these limits in place in both Portland and Multnomah County. And the Portland limits, of course, the first election, the Portland limits first election cycle for which they'll be in place will be 2020.
And you think it's going to make a difference?
Yeah, I think so. The limits on the Multnomah County side went into effect in the 2018 election, and the candidates complied with them. And of course, there weren't a lot of contested races in Multnomah County for county commission, county auditor, county sheriff, and those are the offices and district attorney. Those are the offices in county at the county level that are elected. But what Oregon really needs is limits on the state level, because that's where the real power in Oregon government lies. In fact, when cities or counties try to do things that corporations don't like, the corporations go to the state legislature and have the state legislature enact laws that are called preemption laws. Mm-hmm. For example, Oregon has a state law that says that no city or local government can adopt rent control. Oregon has a state law that says no local government can restrict the use of genetically modified organisms for growing crops. So when cities try to do things that the corporations don't like, they get the law changed at the state level, which prevents the cities and counties and other local governments from being able to do anything about it.
Sounds like what's going on now with the federal government, huh?
Well, the federal government also does this. That is, the business interests go to the federal government and have Congress pass laws that preempt what the states can do and what local governments can do.
Well, then what can the citizenry do?
Well, we can enact campaign finance reform on the state level. Oregon, as I mentioned before, is ranked 49th in terms of having any kind of effective campaign finance regulation. The only state that is worse than Oregon, according to the Center for Public Integrity, is Mississippi. And
Mississippi?
Yeah. We're better than Mississippi.
Okay.
But we're not as good as any other state when it comes to controlling money in campaigns in order to prevent corruption.
Is that going to improve as time goes by?
Well, it will improve if we take action to make it improve. But right now, for example, Oregon is a very serious outlier. Just take the case of Michael Cohen, for example, who pleaded guilty this year to the felony of making a contribution to the presidential campaign of Donald Trump that was larger than allowed by federal law. Federal law only allowed a $2,700 contribution, but Michael Cohen contributed $130,000 in the form of his payment to Stormy Daniels to keep her silent before the 2016 election. So he pled guilty to a federal law felony of making an excessive campaign contribution. This felony is punishable by a fine of up to $250,000 and several years of jail time. And now, of course, you've seen the sentencing recommendations, and he'll be sentenced soon to probably some amount of jail time. But if Michael Cohen had done that in Oregon, in an Oregon state or local campaign, and paid off a porn star to keep silent about an affair with an Oregon candidate, that would be perfectly legal.
That's hard to believe.
No, it is perfectly legal. You might remember the U.S. House Majority Leader, Tom DeLay, back in 2006. He was indicted in Texas and later convicted for channeling $190,000 of corporate money into the campaigns of candidates for the Texas legislature. And of course that was illegal in Texas, but it's perfectly legal in Oregon. That's done all the time. And he would be hailed in Oregon as an astute political operative, but the $190,000 that he channeled wouldn't even be noticed in Oregon because it's so small. The amount of money spent in Oregon campaigns per capita, according to a study done by the Oregonian a couple of years ago, is the highest of any state in America except New Jersey.
Well, normal, average citizens like you should give up a lot of money, some more money to compete with the super rich to buy the politicians. and have the laws changed to favor ordinary citizens.
Well, that should be done, but it isn't being done in Oregon, and it's never been done by the Oregon legislature. The voters of Oregon did enact limits on campaign contributions in 1906 by initiative, and those are in effect for 67 years until the Oregon legislature repealed them in 1973.
Wow. you have some kind of speaker or something that you're listening to, because these numbers you click off and the years are like that. Your memory is phenomenal.
You know, let me check the head ear pin. No, but since those limits have been taken off, the amount of money being spent in Oregon political campaigns has skyrocketed. You might have noticed that in this last campaign for governor, the two major candidates together raised and spent over $40 million, which broke the old record by a factor of 2. The old record had been in the year 2010, when all candidates put together spent $20 million. The amount spent this year was 20 times greater than was spent in 1998, just 20 years ago.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and it's the same when it comes to legislative offices in Oregon. Well, sticking with the governor's office for a minute, the contribution that received the most attention was the $3.425 million that Phil Knight, the former CEO of Nike, contributed to the Newt Buehler campaign for governor, the Republicans' campaign for governor. But that barely beat the amount that the Republican Governors Association contributed, which was $3.36 million, and several individuals, mainly executives from timber companies, contributed as much as $350,000 each. I have a whole list of these that will be shown on the screen, and this page is one of only 4 pages of similar contributions in the hundreds of thousands of dollar range from Oregon individuals and corporations all over the country to the Republican candidate. But the Democratic candidate, Kate Brown, also took huge contributions. She took over $2 million from the Democratic Governors Association, which gets its money primarily from corporations.
Kate Brown?
Yes, corporations, unions, and wealthy persons. She received $750,000 from Every Town for Gun Safety, which is an organization that is funded primarily by Michael Bloomberg. She received $825,000 from Emily's List, which is a political committee that funds primarily, if not exclusively, women candidates. It is also funded primarily by very wealthy individuals. So both sides took very large contributions, and in fact depended upon very large contributions.
You got to get money out of the political process. This is what you're about, isn't it?
It is, and we did have one example in this last election where money was taken out of voluntarily, to a large degree, taken out of the political process. And in this case, the candidate who did that won the race. This was the contest between Joanne Hardesty and Loretta Smith for the Portland City Council seat. Mm-hmm. Loretta Smith outspent her by about $340,000. Loretta Smith spent $750,000, and Joanne Hardesty spent about $430,000. Mm-hmm. But the real difference is that most of the money, in fact, half of the money that Loretta Smith received in the campaign came to her in contributions of $5,000 each or more. So half of her money came in that, and for Joanne Hardesty, only 24% of her funds came in that amount. For Joanne, 31% of her money came in contributions of $200 or less, and for Loretta Smith, only 3% of her funds came in $200 or less. So it was really a contest between a candidate funded by big contributions and a candidate funded more with smaller contributions, and Joanne Hardesty, the smaller contribution candidate, won.
How is she going to do?
I think she'll do fine. Mm-hmm. We'll see. But she's been an elected official before. She was a member of the Oregon legislature for several terms, and so she knows what she's doing. Mm-hmm. In any event, we mentioned spending on the Oregon governor's race. The same trajectory has happened on spending for the Oregon legislature. We're now it's increased by a factor of 10 over the past 20 years, and now it takes, for a contested race, that is where you've got two candidates in the general election, two major party candidates in the general election, the average spending by the top 10 candidates for the Oregon House of Representatives in the 2016 election cycle. What do you think the average candidate spent in the race, raised and spent, just for an Oregon House race, which you can win with 12,000 votes?
I wouldn't guess.
Average of the top 10 was $825,000 each.
Oh, man.
So they're spending huge amounts of money, and of course become dependent upon the corporations and the unions and the wealthy people and the timber company executives, et cetera, who fund the campaigns in Oregon. For the Oregon Senate, it was about the same. It was $750,000 each. So even these seats in the Oregon legislature that you would think could be won by grassroots campaigns are almost always won by the candidate who spends the most money. In fact, in the last two election cycles, the candidate who spent the most money won 94% of the seats in the Oregon legislature. And when the candidate who spends less money wins, it's usually they spend just a little bit less money. It's not like it ever happens in Oregon that a candidate who spends big money loses against a candidate who spends very little. That just doesn't happen. The candidate who spends the big money wins. And the candidate who spends the biggest money wins, as I say, 94% of the time. That's our system.
Well,
why have an election? Just look at the bank accounts of the campaign and say, okay, you win because you have more money.
Why don't Oregon political leaders clean up the existing system?
Because
why don't they?
Our political leaders themselves are addicted to big money. They have succeeded in the big money system. Mm-hmm. They have developed, relationships and communication with the big corporations, the big unions, the wealthy individuals, in order to raise the big money and spend it. Of course, on the governor's race, the vast majority of the money was spent on 30-second TV ads, which are remarkably uninformative and often very misleading.
Yes.
And that's now the case even for contested races in the Oregon legislature. Most of that money is also spent on TV ads. And the second biggest expense is giant postcards, giant slick postcards that are sent to voters. But why would you expect people and politicians who've succeeded in the existing system by spending big money and winning 94% of the time, why would they want to reform the system? Why would they want to give why would they want to give other people a shot at defeating them and taking away their power? It's kind of a catch-22 situation. Let me give you a couple of examples. The voters in Massachusetts back in 1997 passed an initiative to provide for public funding of campaigns in Massachusetts and to have very low limits on private contributions to politicians. The sitting legislature, and this is Massachusetts, this is the supposedly most liberal state in the country, the sitting legislature refused to provide the funds for the public funding of campaign system. So the people sued the legislature in court, and the Massachusetts Supreme Court ordered the Massachusetts legislature to sell the cars in its carpool in order to fund the campaign system. I'm not kidding. They did. So the Massachusetts legislature got together, and by voice vote, so no one could be held accountable, by voice vote they repealed the whole system. Now, the same thing happened in Missouri in, I think it was, got it here somewhere, but it was in about 2003, the Missouri legislature repealed the limits that had been adopted by initiative, eliminated them. Same thing in South Dakota just 2 years ago in 2016. The voters enacted limits on campaign contributions and established a public funding system. And within 6 weeks of the election, the South Dakota legislature went into emergency session and repealed the whole thing.
Well, there's just no fairness at all in this, huh?
Right. So what we need to do is establish a system where the people can set limits on campaign contributions and require that campaign ads identify their top funders.
Yes.
And do it in a way that the Oregon legislature can't repeal it. And so what we're on the streets on now is Initiative Petition 1 for 2020. It's a very simple amendment that just says that Oregon laws consistent with the freedom of speech guarantee of the United States Constitution may regulate contributions and expenditures to influence the outcome of any election, provided that such laws are adopted or amended by an elected legislative body by a 3/4 vote of each chamber or by initiative. So that says that if you adopt limits by initiative, like Oregon voters have on several occasions, the legislature can't change it except with a 3/4 vote of both House and Senate. Now, I'm sort of against that. I think they shouldn't be allowed to do anything, even if it's by a unanimous vote. But that was a compromise. So that's that's our initiative petition on the street. And this slide also indicates how you can get involved with the telephone number and the website address of honest-elections.com. We need to collect 149,000 valid signatures of Oregon voters by July of 2020. So that will probably require, because of the way Oregon throws out a lot of signatures on petitions, that will probably require that we collect about 230,000 signatures, almost 250,000 signatures.
Will they be able to do that?
Will we be able to do that? That's a good question. We've got David Delk and Liz Trojan working on it right now.
Yeah, hero. I love David.
Let's see.
Man.
165.
And Liz too.
About 530 days to July. And if each of them collect signatures a day,
will they sleep?
That won't do it. It still won't do it. So we need volunteers on that. One other way to get the measure on the ballot is for the Oregon legislature to refer it to the ballot. A simple majority in the House plus a simple majority in the Senate can refer anything and refer any constitutional amendment to Oregon voters. And what's happened in previous years is that in every session of the legislature, someone, or actually usually a lot of legislators, introduce a joint resolution to refer to voters a measure to amend the Oregon Constitution for limits on campaign contributions.
Amend the Constitution? Whoa.
So, but what happens to those bills, they're called joint resolutions, is that in most years, nothing at all happens. In some years, the bill gets a hearing before the House Rules Committee or the Senate Rules Committee, where the testimony is always overwhelmingly in favor.
In Salem.
The people are overwhelmingly in favor of this. The votes on our Portland and Multnomah County measures were between 87.4 and 88.6%. Yes.
That's big.
Big, very big. So they get sometimes a hearing in a committee, but then the Democratic caucus in the House or Senate never allows the committee even to vote it to the floor.
Now, whose side are the Democratic caucus on?
They are on the side of big money. They do not allow...
Big money again.
And how it works is that the co-sponsors of these bills are usually predominantly Democrats.
Yeah.
And so lots of Democrats signed into the bill, yes, we want campaign finance reform, we want to refer the measure to voters. But then the leadership of the Democrats in the House and Senate don't allow the committee even to vote it to the floor. So there's never a vote in the floor, not even a vote in committee. So it allows the Democrats to claim that they're advocates for campaign finance reform, when in fact it is the Democratic Party that is not allowing it to occur. Now, over the past 30 years, we've had all Democratic governors in Oregon, and about 2/3 of the time, both the House and Senate have been in Democratic hands, sometimes overwhelmingly, like this coming session. There's 60% Democratic control in both the House and Senate. But they have never adopted limits on campaign contributions. They have never referred a constitutional amendment to voters on this subject. So the interesting thing is that on a local level, like the Multnomah County Democratic Party and Clackamas and Washington County Democratic parties, the Multnomah County Democratic Party endorsed both of our measures in Multnomah County and for Portland. Overwhelmingly, not a problem. So the local grassroots of the Democratic Party is in favor of campaign finance reform. This year, even the state party adopted platform positions for the constitutional amendment. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, they're not in charge of the legislature. It's the Democratic caucuses in the legislature that are in charge, and they don't allow this to come to a vote. Now, maybe this year they will. I mean, in 2019, maybe they will. Kate Brown, because of Kate Brown's widely publicized commitment to get this done. She said that during the campaign. That was one of her absolute top priorities, is to amend the Oregon Constitution for campaign contribution limits. She put out a budget and policy document last week that says that her primary goal is to refer a constitutional amendment to the ballot so that voters in the future can approve the ability to impose campaign finance limitations in Oregon's elections, and to do other things along those lines in order to expose the big money that wealthy donors seek to hide. So that's her top priority. Will the legislature do anything? Probably not. She could make it happen herself if she would simply say that she's going to veto all bills until the Oregon legislature refers this measure to voters. If she was serious, she'd do that.
So she's not serious? She
has yet to show that she is serious. She's yet to show that her commitment is anything beyond rhetorical.
Well, what is the citizenry going to do about that she's not serious?
All that the citizenry can do at that point is collect the 230,000 signatures by the first week of July 2020. Put the measure on the ballot ourselves, and then, fight the big money interests who will undoubtedly spend untold millions of dollars to oppose the measure and to portray the measure in inaccurate ways, and to one of the favorite strategies around the country for opponents of campaign finance reform ballot measures is to portray them as if they are tricks of the political establishment. This is just the political establishment trying to play a trick on you. See, people are very upset with the political establishment, and anything that is anti-establishment is very popular. So the way the opponents defeat such measures is to say that this is not an anti-establishment measure. This is actually a trick. This is the establishment trying to trick you into doing something.
Fake news?
It's kind of like that. It's kind of like fake news. It's kind of like saying that this ballot measure is a fake ballot measure. It's really the politician's trick to trick you into something, so just vote no, or vote no on everything. But we have assembled.
Don't you ever get tired of the kind of issues that you take on?
No. No, I don't get tired.
Before the show started, I was seeing the man from La Mancha,
Mm-hmm.
The Impossible Dream. Did it ever occur to you that song reminds me of you right now, The Impossible Dream?
I don't think it'll be impossible.
It has been so far.
Has been so far.
How about the European nations that have a more democratic system than in terms of financing and money?
Mm-hmm.
They have democratic systems more approximate to what we ideal in America in our Constitution.
Yes, they do, and they also have much shorter election cycles. Mm-hmm. They also have free TV time for candidates, extensive free TV time for candidates.
Sounds like socialism to me.
Oh yeah, well, one of the things that also Oregon is very bad at is not only the lack of limits on contributions, which results in these tremendously huge, expensive races, but also the fact that Oregon doesn't have a real system for disclosing to voters who's paying for the ads.
Oh, yeah, that's terribly
Um,
important.
Every state except Oregon has a law that requires that political ads identify at least their source.
Yeah.
Oregon used to have that law, but in 2001, the Oregon legislature repealed it, and Governor Kitzhaber signed that repeal. Now,
Oh, man.
so in Oregon, all kinds of political ads, except those on TV and radio, those are controlled by federal law and the FCC.
Yeah.
So they have to identify where they're coming from. But all other kinds of political advertising in Oregon can be done totally anonymously without identifying where it's coming from. So part of our Portland and Multnomah County measures, and part of what we would do on the state level, is to require that political ads actually list the top funders of the campaign. This has been very effective in California. In 2014, the Chevron Corporation tried to take over the government of Richmond, California, a city of about 100,000 people. Chevron is a big refinery there, had a series of explosions and released toxic gas clouds that sent several hundred people to the hospital in 2012. So the Richmond City Council was debating an ordinance to require Chevron to at least notify the city when a toxic gas cloud was on the way, so they could tell people to stay inside and put a wet cloth around your face, right? So Chevron decided, well, we don't like that. We're just going to take over the city. So they recruited their own candidates to run for mayor and all the city council positions, and spent $3 million on campaigns for them.
They've got the money.
Put them on TV, radio, billboards, big postcards, brochures, flyers. They were opposed by a slate of environmentalist candidates who had no money, obviously. Well, they didn't have that a little. But Chevron outspent those environmentalist candidates by a factor of 50 to 1.
Oh, we've got 3 or 4 minutes left.
But because in California law required that every one of their ads have to say on it, major funding by Chevron Inc., all of the Chevron candidates lost overwhelmingly. That's what we need here in Oregon. But political ads need to tell us where the money is coming from.
Oh, we got a few more questions here. I'm not sure we'll have time to get to them anyhow, but why should we care that Oregon politicians depend on huge campaign contributions?
Because it matters for every issue. It matters in particular for the environment. Oregon politicians, for example, they talk a lot about reducing greenhouse gases and being, environmental stewards. But in fact, Oregon has a terrible record on reducing greenhouse gases. They haven't reduced it at all. It's just rhetoric. The same thing is true when it comes to controlling air pollution. Oregon has one of the most serious problems of any state of air pollution caused by diesel engines. The EPA in 2015 said that Multnomah County air ranks in the worst 1% of the U.S. counties for diesel particulate and in the worst 2% for cancer risk. So
here in our state?
In our state, in our county. Now, why are diesel engines in Oregon so dirty? It's because California and Washington have banned old dirty diesel engines. And so they can't run them in those states. So companies that own them sell them into Oregon.
How do you get this information?
It's well known. It's all over the papers. So Oregon becomes a diesel dump. Oregon, according to the EPA, diesel pollution in Oregon results in 460 premature deaths per year and $4.5 billion in health costs and lost productivity. So, but the trucking company is a big campaign contributor. They don't control, the big corporations don't control California and they don't control Washington. They've both got limits on contributions. They both require that campaign ads identify their major funders. Oregon has neither of those features, and Oregon is under the thumb of the corporations.
Talking about under the thumb, I'm going to be under the thumb unless we stop this show because it's going on another 2 hours, okay? So, boy, thank you for coming on again. It's always delightful. And what can you say, looking at that camera, that one over there, and tell the viewers in another minute or so what it is you want to tell them based on what we talked about tonight so far.
I want the viewers to contact Honest Elections Oregon at the website that you should be seeing on the screen now, honest-elections.com, and and read it and get involved in the campaigns to limit political contributions in Oregon and to require that political advertisements identify who's paying for them. That is the most important thing I think we can do on virtually all issues in Oregon. And in order to have a government, as you initially mentioned, that is for the people and not just for the big money boys.
To dream the impossible dream, and you're a great dreamer.
I'm dreaming.
So
right.
we have time for a PSA, maybe one or two, about the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. Go to that website and learn more about the American Civil Liberties Union, because our civil liberties are going down the tubes, and not just nationally, but in Oregon, from the stuff you've been saying so far. And the Alliance for Democracy, another organization I belong to. It's very interesting in what they're about. Go to that website and learn more about the Alliance for Democracy. And we got to end corporate personhood everywhere, all over the country. Go to www.amovetoamend.org, ending corporate personhood. Corporations are not people, and money is not speech.
Except in Oregon.
Except in Oregon.
It is.
It is. All right. So let us say good night. Thanks for watching. Remember KFC? Not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too. And to you too. And thanks again, Dan.
All right.
It's always a pleasure.